Hello again. In the first few units of Module 5, we were looking at the role of script, language, and the novel in the production of the nation, in the imagining of the nation, and we looked at how the writers from various languages, focusing on writers in Hindi, we looked at how many of the well-known writers of the period lend their support to this imagining of the nation in the production of the master narrative of the nation through cleansing or through sanitizing their language of its Perso-Arabic influence, and played a major role in the imagining of the nation. In this particular unit, I would look at the cracking of the nation, and again I would look at how language, literature and fiction becomes complicit in this cracking of the nation and the emergence of micro-nationalist identities, in which again writing plays a major role, and the same writing in the same language can be used to not only to construct the nation, but also to crack the nation. So, let us go back to, let us revisit the construction of the nation, and we looked at the master narrative of the nation constructed by the founding fathers of the nation, and we found that over a period of time that cracks began to emerge in this so-called unified fabric of the nation through what someone leading scholar on nationalism, Partha Chatterjee, has called the discontents of the nation. So, who are the discontents of the nation, and why did the cracks begin to emerge? We will not go into that, because we examined that when we were talking about the emergence of macro-nationalist movements. But we did talk about how when the nation was, Indian nation was being produced, there was a new three-nation theory, not a two-nation theory. And this three-nation theory, when I spoke about the role of script and languages, I spoke about the demand, the linguistic demand, which was for three nations. So, there would be a nation based on Devanagari and Hindi, another on Urdu, which would be Islamic nation, and the third nation would be a Sikh nation. But these demands were not made on the basis of religious identities, they were made on the basis of language and script. We found that this third nation was informed because the third demand for the Sikh nation wasn't accepted. So, this was one example of the discontents. We also find cracks within the leadership, and we know that this unity which the nation witnessed during the nationalist movement after independence, or even prior to independence, there were cracks within the leadership, cracks which were patched over for the sake of gaining independence, and these cracks began to emerge gradually. We are also aware of how this non-violent narrative of independence produced based on the Gandhian paradigm was foregrounded, and other nationalist movements, the more violent forms of nationalisms or militant nationalisms, were marginalized to the construction of this master narrative of non-violence resistance. We know the stories of the INA, we know the stories of Gadar, these repressed stories which have now been brought to light, which are being recovered. And we also have the nation being critiqued or interrogated or questioned by from the class perspective. We have rebellions of subalterns from the perspective of class, the peasants who feel that they have been shortchanged in the distribution of the gains of the nation. There also divides emerging along the lines of caste, particularly the emergence of the Dalit movement, where certain groups of people, subaltern groups including peasants and caste, those who were marginalized by their caste, the Dalits, also protest against the so-called homogeneous nation, the unity and diversity narrative of the nation. And one major component of this discontent, one major interrogation came from the women. Now, the women question was very important during the nationalist movement, and women were in fact appropriated in this anti-resistance movement. But the story of the nation remained a story, a male, middle class, upper caste story, in which after the gaining of independence, after the formation of the nation, the women were asked to return to their traditional roles and erased from this history of the nation. So while they were encouraged to emerge in the public space during the nationalist movement, they were expected to retreat to the private space to safeguard tradition after gaining independence. Now, these voices of the others, this rise of the voices of the others, gendered, religious, caste others, began to emerge. These voices, which were repressed during the construction, production of the myth and fantasy of the nation, or the reality of the nation, whichever way we look at it, these voices begin to rise over the years. And because of the rise of these voices, cracks in the nation became gradually visible and erupted in micro-nationalist movements. So today in this module, I look at I won't have time to look at all the small voices of the nation, such as different religious minorities or caste minorities or caste discontents or class discontents, but I would focus only on one particular voice of the nation, which was repressed in the construction of the master narrative of the nation, the voice of the women who have interrogated the gendered master narrative of the nation. And once again, the leading role has been played by writers writing in English, writers from a very elite background who write in English, female writers who have interrogated this gendered narrative of the nation in their own writings, writers such as Anita Desai, Nayanthara Sehgal, Shashi Deshpande, and so on. But instead of focusing on the writers who write in English in this particular unit, I would focus on voices of the nation, voices of the women, and I would combine it with voices of the region, because in the construction of this narrative of the nation, the dominance of the center and the marginalization of the region also led to several regional discontents and the emergence of several micro-nationalist movements. So, in the particular case study I would take up in this unit would be representative of two discontents, the regional discontents and the gender discontents. So, this narrative would combine the voice of the women and the voice of the region, and yet another voice, because unlike the writers who were canonized in the construction of the national culture or national literature, who emerged largely from who were mainly writers who were considered serious writers. There were writers who were extremely popular, and yet they were not given the due by the nation because of the divide between so-called serious literature, the canonization of serious, the so-called serious writing, and the marginalization of popular writing. So, this particular writer that I am going to talk about combines in her writing and in her person three of these marginalized narratives, one of the women, two of the region, of the bhasha, not of the bhashas but of the region, and the third of the bhashas as well, and the third is that of popular versus classical or high culture. So, I am going to talk about a writer who is extremely popular, who enjoyed a popularity which was unprecedented, and a popularity which continues even after her death. But let's first listen to her daughter Ira Pandey, who says, "We still live with the colonial burden, in spite of claims otherwise." You should have seen the hype that was created around William Dalrymple's new book, the crowds that came, but the reality is that only a very thin crust of the urban English-speaking population is getting to read these books. So she's making a case for the bhasha writers. We met a lot of bhasha writers earlier in the first module, where we saw how they helped in the construction of the nation. But now we're looking at we are relooking the bhasha writers, all of whom were not complicit in the writing of the nation. Popular writing in Marathi, Kannada, Malayalam is being ignored. My mother's books, and we will meet her mother soon, my mother's books were being sold, printed on toilet paper. What will happen if we treat our own with so much contempt, she asks. The glitz and commerce of India shining is probably going to scare good writers away. Only those who are glib and well connected will get picked up. And then she summarizes the divide between English or bhasha and bhashas, mainly the modern Indian languages spoken in different parts of India. And she says that around the time of independence, our regional bhasha literature had a richer bank. We looked at this rich bank of bhasha literature when we talked about the role of the novel in producing the nation, and we saw how the novels of Premchand, Bankim Chandra and many others helped in the production of the nation. English writing didn't even have a status. Mulk Raj Anand had to go abroad for publishing. It's a reversal now. Most people don't even know the big names who are writing in Marathi. Our strength is our plurality. Why should we destroy what we already have? Some of the most modern, most real work in terms of the country is being done by the bhasha writers. We owe it to them to translate their work to make it reach the larger reader audiences. Translations are what I want to do. This is what Ira Pandey says. Now we're going to look at the case study of one such writer from who wrote in Hindi, and how this writer constructs the region and who represents the small voice of the region. And even though she was not canonized, she was not included in the canon of the writers who were honored and included in the canon of Hindi literature, she is a writer who enjoyed great popularity not only in her lifetime but also after her death. We are talking about Gaura Pant, popularly known as Shivani. Was born in 17th October 1923 and died on 21st March 2003, better known as Shivani, who was one of the popular Hindi magazine story writers of the 20th century and a pioneer in writing Indian women-based fiction. So she's writing before any of the writers are writing in English. She was awarded at last the Padma Shri for her contribution to Hindi literature in 1982. Born on Vijayadashmi 1923, there's a misprint, it should be 1928, not 23, in Rajkot, where her father was a Diwan. This is her daughter's biography of her mother. She says, Didi, as they call the daughter, scold her, Didi's early years were spent with her parents, who moved from state to state as her father worked with the rulers of Orcha and Rampur. When she was about 8, she and her brother and sister were sent by her grandfather, one of the founding faculty members of the Banaras Hindu University, to Shanti Niketan, where she spent 12 years. Tagore was a great influence on her life and often visited her family in Almora. Her husband, Shukdev Pant, was a teacher and later worked in the education department of Uttar Pradesh. He spent a substantial amount of time in Nainital and moved to Allahabad and finally to Lucknow. Now, she has this multicultural heritage, as we can see: Sanskrit, Hindi, Bengali, and what is her writing about? Again, we have to go by her daughter's word, who says, "Did these novels and short stories are set in Kumayu and have strong heroines, so almost always beautiful." When quizzed about this, she claimed she couldn't bear to write of ugliness in locale or in character. And almost all of her works are in print today and widely available across India. They're not only in print and available across India, but she has a big following overseas. So when we're talking about Bhasha writers, we can think of several other examples, not just Shivani, but the Bengali writer Mahasweta Devi, whose writing is taught in universities, several universities overseas, and she has become the site for the exploration of the Bhasha versus English divide, and the divide versus subalternity and elitism. So it's the popularity of these writers. In the case of Mahasweta Devi, courtesy the eminent post-colonial critic Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak, who brought her writing to the attention of the academia. Unlike Mahasweta Devi's writing, which is familiar to most students of English literature or post-colonial writing across the world, Shivani's writing found its way across the world. She has fans, Hindi speaking or Hindi knowing fans across the world, independent of this academic intervention, because one can find her e-books, one can find people talking about her fiction on the social media, people who are not only based in India but who might not who are not readers within the territory of India, but a very globalized readership which talks about her writing even today. So she garnered a massive following in the pre-television 60s and 70s, as her literary works, like her most famous novel Krishna Kali, were serialized in Hindi magazines like Dharm Yug and Saptahik Hindustan, leading to her cult status as a Hindi magazine novelist. Now, through her writings, she also made the culture of Kumayu somewhat known to Hindi-speaking Indians across the country. And I must share this anecdote. A leading writer from Arunachal shared this story with me about how he would, when he would wait for his copy of Dharma Yoga in his remote residence, because he couldn't wait to read the next serialized version of one of her novels. So what was interesting is that her writing spanned the regions. In addition to the national readership, all lovers of Hindi literature who were divided across the country, including in faraway Arunachal Pradesh, were reading her writings in Dharma Yoga, even though they might not have been officially disseminated in the canons produced by the canons of Hindi literature. We can even think of literary journals like Dharma Yoga and Saptahik Hindustan in the production. In addition to the novel, these serialized several of the novels, as we said even earlier, like thus the Hindi novels which appeared as serialized versions through this periodical literature. We can also talk about the role of periodical literature in constructing the nation and creating these literary communities which converged on the imagining of the nation and the debates on the nation which took place on the pages of these periodicals. So, but what is important is that through her writings, she also made the culture of Kumayu somewhat known to Hindi speaking Indians across the country. And this is now, I would conclude this unit with her importance to the writing of the region and the appropriation of her writing in the construction of this region, which is now known as Uttarakhand, and the identities of this particular region with the success of the micronationalist movement and the formation of a separate state. So, I bring you some images of the region, and you can see why she found beauty distasteful, because as you can see, the region is one of the most beautiful regions in the country, and how her writing plays an important the role of not just fiction but literature, but rituals, festivals, folk songs, folk dance in the production of regional identities, in which Shivani's novels also become complicit. So, we have images of some Kumayunis here, and we can see how the folk music, folk song is important in the construction of regional identity. This is a newspaper report of 2004, and how literature and orature is appropriated in the production of a particular regional identity. And we have the construction of the region through the Holi, and Holi, which is very different from the Holi in the rest of in India, the Kumayuni Holi. And connecting this with the earlier discussion on the role of script, language and identity, we can see how once again the same logic which was used in producing the nations, the three nations in Hindustan, Pakistan and Khalistan, which didn't happen. Now, the same logic of script and language is being used in the production of ethno-linguistic identities within the nation and the formation of regional identities, such as in this graffiti, Kumayuni meri pehchan, Kumayuni meri zuban, Kumayuni Sanskriti meri shan, Kumayuni Vani mera naam. And we have Kumayuni Vani community radio, and we have folk song. So, with this we can see how fiction or writing, we have to again return to the question, Anderson's question about the relationship between script, language, novel and identity, and we find how complicated it gets in the case of India, where the initial role of script, language and identity, such as the Arabic and Devanagari script, as well as Hindi and Urdu language in the construction of the nations of Pakistan and Hindustan, is complicated because in this deviant nationalism, as Partha Chatterjee calls it, there is no one-to-one correspondence between language and identity, as in the case of European nationalisms, because we have in India we have so many languages, and because of this, is it possible to have a single nation based on a single language in the case of a nation which has multiple languages? So, what is the nation that is being imagined through these languages, or through these print communities, or through the linguistic fiction communities of the novel? What are the communities that are being imagined? It seems that in the production of the nation itself, there seems to be some kind of confusion, because when the writers are talking about producing identity through the nation, are they referring to a particular ethno-linguistic, ethno-regional identity, or are they talking about a particular national identity? Seems to me that there is a confusion about what is the nation that is being produced, say, in the writing of a Bengali writer like Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, who has become the site for the debate on the production of Indian nationalist identity. Was he talking about Indian nationalist identity, or was he talking about Bengali identity? Was it Was his writing important in the production of a Bengali nationalism, a Bengali nation, or an Indian nation? So it's more complicated than it seems, but what I wish to point out is how the writing from the region is there seems to be a kind of schizophrenia, which is sometimes accretive and sometimes disjunctive, because in some cases this writing from the region or ethno-linguistic writing or a writing of fiction, the novel in Indian bhashas, sometimes it's accretive with the Indian nation or Indian national identity, or it's important in the imagining of the nation, as in the case of Bengali fiction of Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, how national identity and the imagining of the nation itself is mapped on the identity produced to the novel or to the novels of Bankim Chandra Chatterjee or his other writings. Whereas in other cases, sometimes writing can be disjunctive or it can be accretive. So, taking the case of Shivani or Gaurapan, we see her as a product of a nationalist identity through her very diverse education, through her residence or domicile in different parts of the country, her exposure to different languages, regions, cultures, literatures. So, she in her body and in her person, she forms this very syncretic, very eclectic cultural identity based on the amalgamation of a very basic a pan-Indian Sanskritic identity which was being produced during the period. Along with that, she is shows a strong Bengali influence as well as Humayuni influence. So, to me it seems to presage, or it seems to exemplify that movement away from the nation, which is both micro-nationalist in the sense that her as it points to her Humayuni roots, as well as nationalist. So, writing which combines a strong ethno-regionalism, very ethno-linguistic identities, along with a national identity which is mapped on an ancient Indian language, Sanskrit, is reflected in her writings, and how this writing challenges many other divides, such as the divide between the center and the nation, between writing in English and the bhashas, between writing by male writing and the gender narrative of the nation, and between the so-called serious literature and popular fiction.